Breaking news, Halifax homes are expensive as okay, maybe that's not really breaking news, but Halifax did just earn a title that nobody should be proud of. According to a recent report from Canada's PBO, Halifax now has the worst housing affordability gap in the entire country. Yes, worse than Vancouver. Yes, worse than Toronto. We are at the very top of the list. In this video, I'm going to break down what this report means. And truthfully, the first time I read it, I almost couldn't believe it. Some of the numbers and the details in this report are absolutely mind-blowing. But just before I get into it, if you're new here, my name is Andrew Stevens. I've been a realtor for over 10 years. And if you get any value from this video, don't forget to hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. And if you're thinking about making a move in the HRM and you'd like to get in touch with me, you can reach out to me anytime in the Calendly link below. In early October 2025, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, or PBO, released a report called House Price Assessment Update. The job of the PBO is to provide independent economic and financial analysis to the Parliament of Canada to support its scrutiny of government spending. The report looked at 11 major cities across Canada and compared how actual house prices stack up against what the average household income in each city could reasonably afford. Just before I get into the results of this report, I want to talk about what the affordability gap actually means. So the PBO looked at two main factors. They looked at actual home prices, and this is coming from the benchmark MLS prices. And what that means is basically what is a typical home cost in this city at this time. And they look at the general affordability of an average household in that city as well. So they're talking about average income under normal borrowing circumstances, and they are using borrowing circumstances which would be back in a more balanced market from 2012 to 2014. So they're looking at these two numbers and they're comparing the two, and they're using this equation to do it. Affordability gap equals actual price minus affordable price divided by affordable price times 100% to get the percentage. So in other words, let's say that the actual price was $500,000 and the affordable price was $400,000. So the difference is $100,000 divided by the affordable price of $400,000. That would be 25%. Meaning those homes are on average 25% higher or more expensive than what somebody can actually afford on average in that particular city. So let's take a jump in here to the report and look at the actual results, because to me, this is where it gets pretty shocking. So looking at these 11 cities across Canada, this is what the affordability gaps looked like as of August 2025. We are at the top. Halifax at 74%. Montreal is next up at 58%. Hamilton at 52%, Ottawa at 50%, Quebec City at 44%, Toronto at 36%, Victoria at 34%, Calgary at 30%, Vancouver at 21%, Winnipeg at 18%, and finally Edmonton at 4%. So as you can see, we are at the very top of this list at 74%. And to put it into perspective, we are more than double what Toronto's affordability gap is. And we are more than 4 times the amount of Vancouver's affordability gap. So we used to be known as the more affordable option, and people will be coming here from all kinds of other provinces, especially out west and Ontario. But as you can see from this data, this dream of affordability is fading very quickly. When this report says the affordability gap is 74% in Halifax, here's what it really means. It means the average household would have to earn 74% more income, or home prices would have to drop by over 40% in order to get this affordability gap back to historic levels, or what would be considered a normal balanced level of this affordability gap. This doesn't necessarily mean that prices are going to start plummeting, but it does show how out of reach this is for a lot of Halifax households. For people looking to get into the market like a first-time home buyer, it means it's going to take you a lot longer than it would have in the past to save a down payment. For renters looking looking to get into the housing market as well, it means you're probably going to be stuck renting a lot longer than you would have maybe 5 or 10 years ago, which will, of course, come as no surprise to most people watching this video, as most of you have been following along and you know a little bit about the housing market at this point. And it also shows that it's not just the house prices that are the problem, it's also the factor of income and wages. And the income that they used for this report was also the gross income. And as you know, in Nova Scotia, we are taxed out the ass. So that is another factor that's playing into this as well. So yeah, house prices are very expensive, but we're not nearly to the level of Toronto and Vancouver. But with that being said, our affordability gap is still much higher than Toronto and Vancouver. So it's about more than just the home prices. There's a lot of things that are feeding into this overall issue that we have here. But the fact that we're on top of this list by such a huge margin and we're double Toronto and 4 times Vancouver was shocking to me. Obviously, I know our home prices are out of reach for a lot of people. And obviously, I know they've exploded over the past 5 years. And I know our incomes are low, but I think it was like the gap in this report is what surprised me. Not necessarily that we're on the top. I knew we would be relatively close to the top, but I definitely didn't think we'd be double Toronto or 4 times Vancouver numbers. And the other thing to think about when we're looking at Toronto and Vancouver numbers versus Halifax are that over the last few years, since the peak in 2022 of that sort of COVID pandemic market, those markets have been free falling. They've been huge issues. Home prices have been falling, whereas our market here in Halifax year over year has never gone down. Yes, we had a bit of a plummet after the peak in 2022, but it started to recover around August, September that year. And year over year stats in terms of the calendar year, the price points never actually went down. They haven't dropped in Halifax since 1994 to 1995. So it's been a long time since we've seen that, 30 years since we've seen a drop in home prices. And this year right now, they're up about 4.5% year over year, even with this level of lack of affordability. So it's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, these numbers really blew my mind when I first read this report. So how did Halifax end up at the top of this list? How did we get to this point in the housing crisis? Well, I would consider this to be a lot of factors leading into it, but it's basically a perfect storm. And I've talked about it in several other videos. But first up, population boom. In the mid 2010s, around 2014, 15, 16, we had several years where we were the #1 fastest growing city in Canada, and a couple of years where we were the second fastest growing city in Canada. We had a huge population boom over the last 10 years that, in my opinion, housing wise, we simply were not ready for, and infrastructure wise in general, from a lot of different angles. We were not ready for it. So number 2, supply simply hasn't kept up. We weren't building nearly enough houses. This is generally reactive. So we have this huge population boom. We need houses as we have a shortage. Now the developers are going crazy and there's tons and tons of housing units being built. Now I say housing units because they're not all homes. They're mostly rental apartments. I forget the exact numbers, but I was just looking at the housing starts and completions data that came out in September the other day. Halifax has something like 13,000 units being built right now. Again, most of these are apartments. From that 13,000, there was only about 1,500 or so that were actually houses. The rest of them were all apartments or condos, and condos is very few and far between. So mostly rental apartments and the odd home. Now, that being said, in my opinion, we're still not building the right types of homes, and we really need to get back to that if we want to make a huge dent in this housing crisis anytime soon. On top of that, especially for this report, we have very low incomes compared to some of these other major cities across the country. So our home prices are, getting up there, looking at Calgary, looking at Ottawa, those types of numbers, but our wages are much lower. Our wages here in general in Nova Scotia are low. Our taxes are very high. Our cost of living is very high. So the overall affordability, yeah, it's going to be suffering when you factor in all those variables. We've also had higher interest rates over the last few years compared to years prior. We've had a lot of out-of-town investors. So there's a lot of factors that are coming in. And with all that, it creates this perfect storm of a lot more demand than the current supply. And even a lot of the current supply that we have is not the supply that people can actually afford. Like anybody who's on an average income in Nova Scotia or in Halifax can't afford a new build that they're building today. And that's part of the problem. We're not building what the masses need. We're building what developers want to build. We're building these shiny, huge homes that are overbuilt, 5-bed, 4-bath, 24 2,400 square feet when we should be building things like we were building 30 years ago, something like a more modern version of those split level semis with the bedrooms in the basement that are out in, let's say, Eastern Passage, Sackville, or Cole Harbour. So maybe today that looks like something that's a 2-level on a slab. Maybe you walk in and the main level is like kitchen, living, dining, little half bath tucked under the stairs, and it's on a slab, so no basement. Maybe the whole thing is 14, 15, 1,600 square feet, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom up top. You don't necessarily need a walk-in closet and an ensuite and like 4 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms and that much space. We need to get back to building homes that people can actually afford. And if we do that, then maybe that'll have some relief at that lower level in the housing market. But at this time, there is absolutely none of that happening for a lot of different reasons, but there is none of that happening in our province right now, at least within the HRM, based on what I'm looking at on the MLS and when I'm out there with my buyers looking for homes. What we're seeing right now, in my opinion, is not sustainable. We're going to start seeing people leave Halifax to go to other places because they're not going to be able to afford it. Maybe they go rurally in Nova Scotia, and I've already seen a lot of that happening within my business and people that I know, people commuting in from out of town because Halifax is so expensive. Maybe the wages have to rise, but at the same time, that's going to create a lot of problems for local businesses and every other business as well. So I don't know where we go from here, but I do know one thing. Halifax is quickly becoming very unaffordable, and it's certainly not sustainable. We were once upon a time the more affordable option, but now those days are seemingly gone, especially when you look at reports like this. But the truth is, some of those people who are coming from out of province can still afford it. And it's because they're not getting paid with Nova Scotia wages, right? They're coming from Toronto, they're coming from Vancouver, Calgary, wherever they might be coming from, other areas in Ontario and out west, and they're keeping their job there. They're working remotely, so they're making like double the amount of money doing their job in Toronto than you would be here in Nova Scotia, but then they're paying the Nova Scotia real estate prices, and maybe they have some equity coming from a home in Toronto as well. So there's all kinds of factors like that, but the reality is this is not sustainable. I don't know what comes next, but something at some point has to give. If you got any value out of this video, all I ask is that you hit that like button and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my future content. And if you're thinking about making a move from out of province or just within the HRM in general, don't hesitate to reach out to me through my Calendly link below. I'd love to set up a time to talk and chat and walk you through how that works here in Nova Scotia. Until next time, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support and have a great day.